That's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So good day, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of an Author a Day Live, which is an effort to support writers in need through book sales, author portrait print sales, and donations to the Authors League Fund. By 10 a.m. each morning, a new author portrait will be published at instagram.com/Beowulf Sheehan, and with links to that author's works and the bookstores that of course, it supports. 100% of book sale proceeds I receive and partial proceeds from any and all print sales will support either writers directly or support the Authors League Fund. Since 1917, the Authors League Fund has helped professional authors, journalists, poets, and dramatists who find themselves in financial need because of medical or health-related problems, temporary loss of income, or other misfortune. Not every writer whose photograph is published here as a household name, but your support of writers by purchasing their works and/or prints of their portraits will help those in need keep their homes and more. There will come a time when we will need to reflect upon, heal, and progress from this challenge of our time. Writers will meet that need. Thanks for coming to their need now. So, our first guest is Mira Jacob, author of The Sleepwalker's Guide to Dancing, and more recently, Good Talk, a Memoir in Conversations.
Oh, you have your cute.
Mira makes her art for the world, makes her home with her husband and son in Brooklyn, and today she shares her time with us. Welcome, Mira.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being a part of this. So we only have so much time, but let's start by talking about this beautiful tome in Between My Hands.
Yeah, sure. Right, so you took the cover photo too, which was kind of a fun collaboration. So that is a graphic novel that I wrote I started it a couple years ago. I was a novelist before, so I hadn't ever done anything like that. And I made the transition because I realized there was no other way to tell the story. My son was in those weird years of being like 6 to 8, which means that he was asking a lot of kind of guileless, but really devastating questions about his color. So I'm my color, my husband's white and Jewish, and my son is kind of between us. He had a super big obsession with Michael Jackson, which meant that he was asking all these questions like, is Michael Jackson white or brown? And I totally messed up that question. And it kind of went on from there, but a lot of his questions were, some of them were really funny, like what happened to his other glove, which is such a great question. What happened to his other glove? But some of them were really hard, like are white people afraid of brown people? And so the reason that I ended up drawing this book is because I knew if I wrote it, no one would believe it. I don't know how to say that in a different way, but I just knew that there's always a certain kind of person that reads work like mine to dismiss it. And I had this kind of gut feeling that if I drew it, they wouldn't be able to help but read it in a way. And so that was my in to making this book.
Well, I would think that the first language we all speak is the visual.
That's a great point. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So that's universal to all of us. And then, of course, we work from there to the languages of our nations, of our cultures, and on and on. So the impact of having visual expression in this beautiful book is, of course, all the stronger for having it done that way. It makes it unique. It makes it that much more quickly, easily processed. And so much of this is so very powerful. I think it's easy for us to dismiss one another if we only have words about them. And those words are sometimes used in a way that dehumanizes them, the other, the enemy, things like that we see in military conflicts, if you will. But as soon as you have a picture and you can see yourself in that picture, then we're suddenly all the more human.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah. That's part of what's so wonderful about your work. And we will, of course, everyone have time for questions and answers at the end of this little chat. But I do want to then, from your book, segue to what it is that you've seen since your book's been published. It's been out for a few months' time now. It's like close to a year.
Yeah, it's been a year. Actually, the paperback just came out last week, which is a great time.
How about that for timing? Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. But what have you seen then in the landscape of this country as you've gone across it promoting your book? Say hi to people and share your story.
So, what's really been interesting about it is I think I expected, because I'm a woman of color and I'm online and I get the same amount of hate that every other woman of color gets online. I think I expected that to be more a part of the tour, and I was really geared up for that, meaning I had kind of I had prepared myself mentally for the kind of situation that happens in bookstores where someone who's very angry about their life or some interaction they had with a person of color comes to tell you how wrong you are about your own. Um, and that's not an unusual situation, but I will say the thing that was surprising to me about this was how many people saw themselves in the story itself. And it wasn't South Asian women married to Jewish men with a son with an obsessed with Michael Jackson. Like it was a lot of people that came with their own very specific backgrounds, but had never felt seen in the broader context of talking about race in America. And part of that, I'll say the upside of that that has been so validating is hearing all those stories, because I think when I made it, I sort of drew it to this, like this America that I felt had been sort of invisibilized, and I was starting to lose faith in the idea that we even existed. So going to those, being on tour and seeing people and being like, oh my God, we're all still here. Wait, we're all still here? We're all still here. That was amazing.
Yes.
This part about it, I would say, is how many people came to me with really hard stories about what's happening in their lives, and you know, and most, I think the ones that wounded me the most were usually a person of color where one parent was white and had voted for Trump, and it had caused a kind of psychic rift in the family and in them, like in their own body. The amount of pain that they were carrying around, the amount of rage, was so understandable. And also I guess I didn't anticipate that. So I think the first few times it happened, I was a little bit maybe like deer in the headlights. Like I just would listen and nod, and then later I would go home and just cry. And I had to find a place that could hear that that level of pain, and also um, not ingest it whole, like have a space to hold it, but not take it in all the way, because I don't think that helps us with each other in a way when we take it in all the way. I think it helps if we can kind of be smart boundaried around it and hold it and say, like, this is what yours looks like. But when we let it destroy ourselves, I think it's not particularly helpful in the long run. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. I mean, the first thing a book does is it gives us the chance to talk. And of course, the irony of the title of your book's not lost on me, but it opens up a dialogue first between the reader and the writer.
Yeah.
And of course, that dialogue is now extending by way of your book tour to these people who've had the chance to read your work and have this reaction to it. I wonder, for those families who've had that experience, did any of them share with you some degree of resolution?
No.
Were they left in pain?
I gotta tell you, white people always want that. That's not what happens. Y'all want the story to like end in a cheer. I'm so sorry. It doesn't happen that way. No, it's not. It's not. I mean, just honestly, that is not what happens. What happens though is that we find each other and we feel heard and seen in that moment. And that I don't have, like in my own family, I think people ask a lot, does this mean that everything's better because you wrote this book? And it just doesn't. It means that everything is complicated, and that we will remain to be as complicated as we are. But I think the thing that's always important for me to say, because I really feel this, is that I still love my family. Like I love them with both hands. I love the complication. The parts that dehumanize me absolutely dehumanize me, and I have to turn to other people for support.
Right.
But I can't change the way my heart is built.
Right. And we know now that there are different forms of love, and we can love each other in different ways.
Yeah.
However challenging they might be for certain people in our lives.
Yeah.
And at least you're giving then, by way of your book, the chance for people to, as you say, to see it, to hold it, to acknowledge it.
Also, the idea, for me, one of the things that was surprising, and I don't know why I didn't realize this, I didn't realize two things. One, how many like adults would be like, I don't know if I can read a graphic book. And that how many kids that were younger than this is at all appropriate for would pick up the book and read it because their parents got it. So I had a lot of people writing me at first being like, my 8-year-old read the sex scenes. And I was like, like that was not what I didn't write them for your 8-year-old. But I think the other part of that is that there's definitely been a young audience for, in addition to the adults who read it and kind of felt it on the identity levels, there's been a whole contingent of teenagers, which I've just found so amazing, who I just can't imagine if I would have had a book, like, you know, we all write the book that we want to have. And I think this year having Min Jin Lee come, like, if I would have had that book when I was a kid, I always think now when I'm reading different books, if I would have had Caitlin Greenidge's books when I was a kid, if I would have had her writings, like, how would that have changed me? And it's really sweet to see that, to see the teenagers who are like, it's me, you wrote me. And I'm like, I did, that's amazing, because I'm not you, but yay.
But there's something in each and every story that hopefully touches some part of us. So that's part of what's wonderful about what you've done. How old is your son?
He's 11.
And I would hope he's read your book.
Oh my God. So I have to tell you, that was such a funny conversation. So I had read him. He's the only person that I said to, you can take anything out. You don't have to explain to me. I think it's really wild to expect a child to be able to explain why something makes them uncomfortable. So instead, what I said is, I put you in here. I can change your face if you're not comfortable with that. I can change anything you want. And he read it, and so I went through all the scenes with him specifically, and I was like, what do you think of this, that? And we went through, and he didn't have any changes. And what's so funny with kids is the way their memories work. So sometimes, you know, when he would first have a conversation and I'd write it, he'd be like, oh yeah, that one. And then 2 weeks later, he'd be like, did that happen? And I was like, what are you doing? You, of course it happened. And then like 2 months later, he'd be like, I'm so funny. And I was like, you are. So I told him he could change or take out anything. He didn't actually have anything he objected to. But I am aware, and I continue to kind of think there will be a point in time where he'll have plenty to object to. And I think part of my writing this book is just deciding that I have to just be up for that conversation whenever it comes. Like there's no limit on when you can feel frustrated by something that was not completely in your control. And I think I just have to be open to that conversation. And the other thing we talked about, honestly, was the idea of people wanting him to perform the self that's in this book, because he was 6 to 8 and he was really cute. He's 11 now. He's still pretty cute. But I think in the way that I think there's a way that race is talked about in this book that feels accessible to people, which is helpful. I think the part that's less helpful for us as the family in it is the people that want him to be this kind of racially innocent kid that he was at 6 to 8. And I just feel like I know this happens because sometimes he's with me when I'm in bookstores and people will say, say this line. And I've told him that if anyone ever says that to you, if anyone ever comes up to you and tells you, say a line from the book, you're allowed to just walk away. You're just allowed to turn around without explanation and walk away. And he was like, really? Just no explanation? I'm like, no explanation. You don't have to perform racially for people that need race to stay innocent. You're not that kid anymore. I'm not the mom that wrote this exactly anymore. We're allowed to just be who we are, even if it's kind of rude, which I got to tell you was like the greatest. He was really excited about the rude part.
Well, of course, now life has changed for you as it has for all of us. Suddenly, all these wonderful people in the room, you and I, are no longer in 3 dimensions, we're in 2, at least to each other. And you have left New York temporarily with your family. And how are you carrying on?
So I left New York because my mother lives in a really remote area in New Mexico. And I've lost one parent. I think probably a fair number of people have been through that situation. And the idea of not being able to get to her was really rough for me. And I think so many people are in this moment right now. So if you're holding that and I'm saying these words, I'm just with you. So we got here a few weeks ago and we quarantined. It's really hard not to be in New York. I am absolutely a New Yorker. it's hard to be away from my community. And it's hard to be away, frankly, from such a vibrant community of people of color. I'm kind of on the moon right now. We don't see other people. But the good part is I do see my mom every day. And I know that I can be here with her for the duration. And that has sort of put me at ease in a way. I think wherever anyone is, there's a trade-off. I'm sure we're all feeling this, like, here's the one thing I like, and then here's the 17 things I hate, you know, like I think we're all kind of moving through that. And I'm just like, I think I'm probably just like everybody else in that I wake up every day and I try to think of the things that are working so that I can, like the things that I can do, the things that are within my bandwidth. And I don't mean like the work that I can get done. I mean, the things I can slow down about, the ways I can show up for conversations. I just try to kind of focus on that.
Right.
And it keeps me from spinning into the unknowing.
Yeah. I mean, we all can't help but be ourselves. And your work is that of, that's both good and bad, but, and everywhere in between. But your message, of course, remains. And I'm curious to know how well you're able to carry that message then to people in our new state of affairs. I hope that I'm not the only book talk that you're giving this time.
No, I'm not. No, we had an incredible talk. I was just talking with, if anyone needs some book recommendations, I have a few for you, but Kathy Park Hong had Minor Feelings, her book about the Asian American, it's about your feelings as an Asian American person growing up where you're not supposed to have any feelings. And it's a book of essays, and I'm oversimplifying it, but it's a beautiful book. And I talked with her and Kevin Wynn, who has his new novel out, of course. And so we had this incredible moment this week where I think it was like 600 people showed up, and a lot of them were Asian American. I could tell from the chat. And it was just this brilliant moment of everybody coming together and talking about, and they're giving each other book recommendations and what are you doing to stay sane? And it was this beautiful sort of blooming community that happened so quickly online. And I have to say, that was just a real spark of joy. And it would not have happened in another situation. And I don't say that to make light of anything else that's happening in this world, because I think there's no way to justify things. There's no way to say like, well, this happened, you know, but I do think that moment, just as an Asian American person and, you know, a South Asian person, and knowing how hard it is to ever find any of us, to see all of us in there, like book nerds talking about books, being really excited about so many things, felt amazing. It felt beautiful.
That's a lovely thing. Perhaps we'll be that busy here too one day, but just diving in with where we are, and then having had dialogues like the one you just shared with us. I'm not a physician. I don't believe you are either. I'm not a scientist. I don't believe you are either. But do you have a sense of where we might be going?
I mean, it's so hard to extrapolate that, right? It's so hard to know, because I think the external factors, but if we sort of follow the trend lines, I think we understand that a lot will be lost, right? There are ways that feel seismic to me as a person that grew up in a certain time and place. So I understand specifically the way that trauma works, the way that, you know, I'm thinking of when I was growing up, the AIDS crisis broke in the moment that I hit puberty, actually. So I was learning about like how to be in a body in the same moment that I was learning that my body could get this thing and could give this thing. And it was a really wild way to figure out sex. And I'm thinking also about 9/11 and the moment of understanding that something big had happened that changed everything. Also, I remember watching the Gulf War break out on a television and thinking, oh no, this is what it's like to watch violence and retribution. All of these things together, I think, can give you a kind of a sense of dread and worry, and specifically the loss of life. And that's real. And I would never say that is not real, because I think it is. But I think there's also this really wild thing that is happening, which I've been watching, which maybe some of you have been watching, which is the ways in which we try to find each other. And I really love that about humans. I mean, I wrote a whole book about talk because I think it's really wild that as animals, our whole way of communicating is to blow noises out of our mouths at each other and like hope we understand each other. Like, why do we do that? We do that. And so this moment in which we're trying to find each other, and the way, kind of the wily ways in which we're doing that, in which we're reaching out to each other and setting up different ways of meeting interactively, and like showing up and waving to each other across 20 feet just because you just need to see that person and say like, I see your body, you see mine. It's such a, to me, that's evidence of love, like a really specific and beautiful tenacity when it comes to love. So I think about that a lot right now. I think there's something actually really amazing about that. And my hope is that we'll keep finding ways to show up for each other, because it feels to me like we're all fighting pretty hard to do it.
Yes.
I didn't know. I always wondered what it would take, and so it's really kind of interesting and lovely right now to see that, to see people getting really smart about how to hold on to each other in this moment.
Right. We have a common challenge.
Yeah, exactly.
And finally, it's something that unites us. That it's such a shame that it is something negative and often tragic. But we have this moment of unification, and there's a chance for us to do something with it. I did read in the news that I think in Afghanistan, people have factions have stopped fighting with one another so that they can, in harmony, work against the virus. My upstairs neighbor, you're reminding me, had said something quite beautiful. He is a filmmaker from Iran, and he's not here. I'm the only one left in my building right now. But in speaking with him, he had said that he had spent all of his formative years through his 20s living each day not knowing if he would survive to the end of that day because of the daily bombing somewhere in his country. And that gave him a positive outlook on life, because each day he then made the most of.
Yeah.
And how fortunate he is to now be here with someone, with a wife, with people, with community, with people he loves, and to be able to move forward each and every day, counting that the day is precious. And I think that's what we all have before us now.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if it's okay to open up the
Sure.
conversation to our guests and see how what questions they might have for all of us. So this is my first time everybody doing this, so I hope I am doing this properly. But if anyone should have a question for Mira, if you could raise your hand, please do so.
That's someone raising their hand or moving their, I can't tell if that person.
Or moving their screen. And I can also, I mean, we're not that many people. I can also just unmute everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do that. So.
Oh, no.
Hi, everybody. We can hear your voices now.
Hi.
Would anyone care to have a question for Mira? Even if your face is not moving, you don't have to.
The chat, we can do that.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, I'm going to rather mute everyone again. That's a lot of background sounds. That's it. That makes more sense. So again, if anyone would wish to ask a question, I know that you have, Mira, some students of yours in the room.
Yeah, my students ask me questions all the time. My students are probably like, I ask her questions every Wednesday.
And they're still welcome to do so now. But no questions as of yet. And sorry, we just had one more person join. And let's see if she is there. Muna, welcome to the talk. If you have any questions for Mira, you're welcome to raise your hand.
By the way, so we can be clear on the things that I think are totally valid questions to ask, because I think I see that there are writers on here as well. I recognize some names of people who are studying writing and doing. If you guys have any, I can answer any question that you want about the book, about the emotions part, about what it's like to write about real people in your life and how to draw boundaries around that, which was really hard for me to figure out. But also just to open it up, if you have questions about the industry and how it works, I'm always open to talking about that, because I feel like it's a really, it's a hard industry to break into in a way. And it's also, I feel like people have a lot invested in keeping people in the dark about how it works. And I am not one of those people, because I want more voices in the room. So just to put that out there if anyone has questions about that.
And please raise your hand then if you do have a question. And I'll open up your voice. I'll start with a question then.
Sure.
How is your writing impacted now that you're isolated with your family?
I mean, first of all, what time to write? But it's funny. I'm doing the thing. I wonder if some of you are doing this, where it's either fever or famine, and like no feast. Meaning, I either am like suddenly have to write something, and I have to write it immediately, which is a really weird thing to do when you have a child and school and everything else to manage. But I have to write it for, you know, a couple of hours, or my brain just feels like it's a sand trap, and like I have no idea how it's going to work again. I think my rhythm might be a little bit off. I don't know why, but that's how it's sort of working for me. I did spend yesterday drawing a long piece, and it felt so good to get lost in the way that lines and bodies work. It felt so good to put my mind on that, on the active part of that, and thinking about how a hand holds itself when it can't hold the thing that it wants. Like I spent all day thinking about that.
That actually brings up an even better point, which is having produced Good Talk, then you're working in two artistic media.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't ask just about your writing, because there's also the drawing. There's this photographic reproduction that you're creating. And are you thinking then with your next story to keep all of those things going? Are you seeing this way anew and thinking that is your way of seeing now for a while?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think the next book that I'm working on is, hopefully, if I can pull it off, it's 4 different points of view, and one of them is purely visual. And I'm sort of excited just to try. I always feel like, I don't know how everyone else approaches their art, but I always feel like I want to go to the place that I haven't been before, and the place that takes some of the tools that I picked up on the last round. So this, you know, the next move for me is like, what can I do that isn't actually adjacent, but is sort of like I can barely see it on the horizon, and how do I get there? So the thing that I'm currently working on sort of feels like a big stretch, and it could be a colossal failure, but that is also, I think, part of the joy for me, is the idea of how in the world do you make this thing when you haven't seen it before, and you have to like build your own language to get there.
And now, of course, you can only watch the horizon out your window.
Yes, right. Well, I mean,
and metaphorically within yourself. So that reach is all here and here now.
Yeah.
All the more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you get there, we'll all be thrilled to see what you've done.
Thank you.
Next have to share. If anyone should have any questions, feel free to ask. And Caroline, let me see how I can answer.
Oh, I unmuted myself. Is that okay?
Oh, that's absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, I was figuring this out. There's a question in the group chat, which I am also interested in, which is sort of how relating to this, the drawing. I mean, that's just so huge. And how did you figure all that out? Was that a skill you already had?
Oh, such a good question. Okay. Yeah. What I'll tell you about that. I didn't, I had it in that I've always drawn. I have journals for forever. And I was always, what I would do, especially when I was writing fiction, is if I couldn't figure out a way through a scene, I would draw an item from it. And I would do that. And I later read, I don't know if you guys have read Linda Berry, but she talks about this so much. And it's such a great thing to remember, which is that when you get locked up in one part of your art, you can actually turn to something else, and it sort of relaxes the muscle around the part of you that's grown too precious. So for me, when I couldn't write, I would just start drawing like a shoe or a leather jacket or something from a scene, and that would relax my mind enough to let me remember how my brain can move and how I can see things, and it would bring another element in. At the same time, I had no idea how to draw something of this magnitude. My faces sort of looked like weird, like always way too angular and too long necks and kind of totem pole faces. And I knew when I was doing this book that I had to be able to draw a real likeness of people. So what I did was I watched a ton of YouTube tutorials about drawing over 3 years. And I just spent like months on things like noses. Noses are really hard for me. Mouths are really hard. And I would just try and try and try. And it sounds really silly and amateurish, but I'm pretty open about that. And I say that because I think so often what stops us from doing things is this idea that like, but I'm not going to be as good at it as someone else is. And you know what? I'm not ever going to be as, as good of a drawer, as, an illustrator, as so many of my friends who are super accomplished. That's okay. I needed to learn this to do one kind of story, and I put some pretty sharp parameters around how I would do it. And I think if you have an idea like that and you don't know how to do the thing, you can actually just decide to walk toward it, meaning take it little by little and like break it down into steps and just walk toward it, because then you end up making something that no one else could make. I mean, yeah, I'm not going to be the illustrator that my friend Peter DeSevis is. He's amazing, but also I illustrate in this way. I told the book in this way. No one else could tell the book in the way that I told it. And I feel like sometimes that's what your art asks of you, is to sort of to break it down into steps and walk toward it. That's where the faith comes in.
So we have from our chat 2 questions. From Mai, we have the question, hi Mira, I haven't been able to write since the pandemic and have dabbling in comics and graphic memoir instead. I was wondering how you started drawing technically.
Yeah. So so technically, just so you know, so I went to those sketchbooks, but then the other thing is I use Adobe Illustrator, and it was a real crapshoot. And figuring out how to draw with a stylus is really wild when you're used to holding a pencil and you're used to having, frankly, personality. Paper gives you personality. The friction of moving something across a surface gives you personality. You have to recreate your own personality when you're doing stuff graphically. You have to figure out a way to do that on your own. So for me, that was just a lot about looking at kind of my lines and my sense of urgency and what I was trying to get across. This all sounds really complicated, but it's not. It's kind of, I feel like it's really underrated how much really good work you get done in your art when you just think about it, when you just sit down and like allow yourself to just sort of think it through, not with the urgency of this is due tomorrow, but rather with the like, what does this moment need? And so right now, you do have the time, and that doesn't mean like you should get something done, but I would just rather say, instead of telling yourself I'm not getting anything done, know that what you're doing is you're looking at things in another way, and give yourself the reward of doing that. Like I tell my students this a lot, but most I think of being an artist that gets things done in the world is allowing yourself a sense of accomplishment for meeting manageable goals. So maybe your manageable goal right now is to look at 3 different kinds of graphic art a day and think about the differences between them and how that worked for you emotionally. Like, that's great. I see I see Lindsay with a question.
Yes. Hi, Lynn.
I just wanted to ask, has there ever been a person who was like South Asian or a person who had a similar background to yours? Has somebody like that ever confronted you about your book, or had like negative feelings about it, or seemed offended? And how do you handle situations like that?
Yeah, I come from a really conservative family, so I think I have horrified a good chunk of them. So there's, and I also know, one of my most bewildering comments happened once in Houston, where a woman my age who was South Asian was saying, I see that you get these kind of death threats and anger from people, and I'm just curious if you've ever thought of the tone of voice that you use, because you know, I really pay attention to my tone of voice. And I think that, you know, maybe it's something that you would want to pay attention to if you're getting this kind of attention. And I was like, wow, you know, and she said it in that kind of faux helpful way. But what I pointed out to her is like, I think it's wild that you think that there's a tone of voice that I'm using that deserves a death threat. I think it's wild that you've assumed this crouch position so thoroughly that you would imagine that just expressing yourself is means enough and justification enough for someone to be violent with you. I don't know how you want to bring younger bodies into a world in which that is expected of you. I don't want to do that. Which is to say, yeah, people get upset all the time. They get upset about me drawing myself naked. They get upset about, you know, the sex and the drugs and the references. They get upset about, sometimes people get upset about the fact that I talked about colorism openly. And I've given white people an excuse to be racist because I talked about colorism openly. And here's what I would say to all of that, because I do think about that a lot. And it's always obviously really scary to write something when you come from a marginalized community and to write honestly about it. I think the thing I tell myself is that we're allowed to know ourselves. And we are that same kind of permission that whiteness grants itself for getting up in the morning. We are allowed to grant to ourselves. We're allowed to know ourselves. We're allowed to write about ourselves. We're allowed to write the things that make each other uncomfortable. We're allowed to have the full human experience without always feeling like we're letting our entire community down. And I think part of that is taking these steps toward what the truth looks like.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I'm really, really happy that you discussed colorism in your book. I think that people need to talk openly about that more, especially Asian people, South Asian people, Southeast Asian people, because it is a thing. It hurts so many people.
It is a thing. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Lindsay, thank you so very much. There are two more questions from the chat. One is from Sadia, who asks, is a graphic memoir easier than the written one?
No, it's a different problem. It's just a different set of problems. You kind of, with a written one, you can really say exactly what you mean. And especially I'm a writer. So to me, that was, getting the right word is easier in a certain way. What was easier about doing the graphic novel for me in this form at this moment was it left me an emotional space that I couldn't get from the written word, meaning like I made a lot of rules for myself, and one of them was I never had to put expressions on my characters' faces. And I did that because I was tired of explaining racism to people who don't care, to people who want us to perform a certain kind of sadness or joy or pain or whatever the fuck. And so I allowed myself the kind of emotional distance once I took the expressions off our faces, but that left me with other problems. How do you get people to care if the faces don't move? You got to put all the caring into the dialogue. You got to put all the caring into those two sentences that set up a scene. How do you do that? It's just working a different muscle. I wouldn't say either is easier, but they just open up completely different avenues in you.
And from Joy, we have the question, did you learn anything poignant, unique, unexpected from drawing the faces of people you love so dearly?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. I would say that when you're drawing the face of someone, even if you don't care for that person particularly, there's something really incredible about letting yourself rest within the lines of someone else's face. Mm-hmm. Like this sort of the commonalities that we have, and you notice how like one person who you wouldn't think had anything in common with this other person, it's not that they're of the same race, it's that there's a certain look in their eye that is similar, or a way their mouth rests that is similar. There's the commonalities go beyond race and they go beyond aesthetics. There's like a feeling under the features that you can feel sometimes. And I would just say that every face that I've drawn, it becomes a face that I love in a really different way.
It's so wonderful to hear you say that. I have similar thoughts running through my mind as I attend to people when I photograph them, and then as I post-process, retouch their faces. There's so many countless lines.
Yeah.
I've said to plenty of subjects, I think I know the pores of your skin better than you do yourself.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true of me.
But that gets that.
My skin better.
And of course, there's the response I get sometimes is difficult, self-deprecating, and yet it is one thing that's universal to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it is absolutely inherently beautiful. I'm reminded of the words of a photographer by the name of Andres Serrano, who a number of years ago did a series of portraits of people who had already passed away. He photographed them in the morgue.
Mm.
And one person had been a burn victim. And the mortician took a knife and sliced off about 2 or 3 millimeters of that person's skin, showed it to Andres and said, see this? That's how deep racism goes. After that, we're all the same.
Mm.
And there's something very, very poignant in that, and also tragic and sad about that, for that issue to be as large and shameful as it is across our country and beyond. But you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's a beautiful, beautiful statement. I wonder, does anyone have any other questions?
Yeah, I actually do have one question.
Okay, Kavya. Let's see.
Hi, sorry, I just joined with my father.
I didn't expect to get on the video.
I know you were talking a little bit about the global pandemic that's occurring right now, but I know he had one question regarding it.
Well, I mean, this is a follow-up to what Beowulf just mentioned, that racism could be just skin deep, and beyond that, we're all equal. With this watershed moment upon us with coronavirus and it being a great equalizer, do you think in the near future there is some glimmer of hope where people stop looking at color, creed, and race and be more forthcoming to work towards a common cause, right? I mean, this, as you see, I mean, there's no boundaries on which this virus affects anybody.
Right, right. I mean, you know, in the way that I've been thinking about this so much, in the way that we are now all, and people say this all the time, right? People say like we are all one body, but that's always, I'm spiritually depleted. So when I hear things like that, I'm always like, I don't know what that means. But I do actually know exactly what that means in this moment. I understand in a way that I kind of never knew before, how we are all of one body. And that has been really interesting, and that's been really amazing, right? That level of knowledge that we have now, and the way, and the interconnectedness. In my most utopian version of life, of course, this would change everything. In the way that I've experienced life, I imagine it will change one good thing going forward. And then we'll have to kind of battle it again and see, like, and kind of resettle again and rethink again, as we always do, as humans are always kind of shuffling and making sense of things. But even that one thing, I think, matters so much. And I'm curious what it will be from this time. I'm curious, I don't know if it will be specific to race, but I'm curious of how we'll experience other people's bodies as our own, you know?
One thought I have, if I may, is that these voices we're sharing now make for a really beautiful and vital experience. And of course, we have a responsibility to share those voices to a greater breadth across our planet. And I think that then with that, with Mira's sentiments, expanding this dialogue, our level of understanding, a level of humility, a level of response toward one another as beautiful human beings, we have that chance. I think the challenge then is not only the virus, but it is that of voices louder and more present than ours who don't wish for us to see how beautiful we are together.
Mm. Yeah, that's a fair point. Absolutely.
Which means that something like this can travel further than our own voices, because we can't be in every room, but a book can go many, many places. It's part of what makes what you've done, Mira, so beautiful.
Thank you.
If there are no further questions,
Oh, there's one other question.
is there one? Great. Okay, bear with me 1 second. Oh, and we do have more other questions. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, so.
Hi,
Muna,
can you
thank
hear me?
you.
Hi. Thank you so much for this, Mira. it's funny what you said about this pandemic, and it wouldn't have been in this form because I wouldn't have been able to see you. I'm in Nepal. It's like 10:30 p.m. and this is so lovely. So thank you. And I finally got your book through people who are coming from India, because we don't have your book here in the country either. But it's all done and it's beautiful, and really thank you so much for writing it. I have so many questions, but it's like one of those I have to ask one question, and it might be a stupid question, but I was wondering a lot about humor. And I mean, I don't know, like, do you have to be a funny person to write humor? Like, can it be learned? And then, well, that might be the dumber side of the question. But then the other question is like, how do you pick, you know, those humorous scenes, and how do you, because what I felt in those pages, like, I was laughing, but I was like crying. It was like sad, and I was crying, like, you know, so it was like, why am I laughing? Why am I crying? Like, so like, I think humor was working. Humor was doing something very important, which I wonder if it was just words. I mean, I've read some humorous stuff with no images, but I do wonder about that, about humor. So I don't know if it's a question, just to say something about humor.
So if you're writing humor, humor is about beats. It's about the cut of a line. And it's about the way your eye takes in the information of the words and the way that your inner ear hears them. So a lot about writing humor, the way that I write humor, is about dialogue and about the way that what we say to each other, and more importantly, what we will never say to each other, right? Like, that's the kind of. So to write, I think it is really important, if you're interested in writing humor, to read how other people do it, because you will hear their cadence and you will hear the way that they do it. I watch a lot of stand-up comedy just to hear how people speak and what makes something funny. Like, unpacking what makes something funny is the least funny thing you can do, but it's really helpful if you're trying to write humor. The other thing I would say is that I don't know that I know the words themselves are funny. I tend to not think of myself as a funny person as much as a really angry person. And, you know, like, potently angry. And most of what you will see in my humor is lightly veiled rage. And I just know that that's where I live. And I think people that don't often want to see that, because they want to kind of, they want to beautify it. You know what I mean? They want to be like, oh, but you're so nice, or oh, you're so kind, or, you know, this is about love. And it's like, no, I'm angry. I'm angry for a while. And the way that my anger comes out is I get funnier and funnier as I get angry. So the thing that you're reacting to in the book is sometimes when I'm at my funniest is when I am at my most angry. And you'll feel that in the pages. And that's what you're bouncing against. Which is also my way of saying to you that I think a lot of times as women, we're expected to placate people. And my humor, for me, is the kind that does not placate people. It leaves you sort of deeply uncomfortable so that you are crying while you're laughing. And I feel like that's my right to do that, having survived this world in this body.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
I have a question. Well, actually, first, Lindsay, did you have a question? Okay, so I thought you adjusted there for a moment. No worries. We have a question from Yesha, which reads, hi, I too grew up in the 70s and 80s in breathtakingly racist America.
Yeah.
I think her question thereafter is, how do you see the change since then?
After the
Yes, you're unmuted. If
oh,
I said that.
Hi, sorry. I was trying to type. What I was trying to express is that, like, I feel that it was really racist, but that, like, I'm also Indian American, but that we all accepted it. That was just what it was, and many of us didn't even think of it as racism. Like, I remember in high school, a friend telling me that you're pretty for an Indian, and just kind of like accepting it, like I mean, knowing that it was wrong and yet accepting that that's just how it is.
Yeah.
But like now feels,
yeah, of course, yeah. Go on. What?
Yeah, and now feels so different. But like, I'm having a hard time. Sorry, I look terrible, so I had to turn the video off. But I'm just having a hard. I just feel like it's so different now. But like it's like parts of it were scarier then, you know. But not like now it's like scarier on a different. I don't know. It's such a jumble. That's why the question doesn't make sense. But
it's okay. I think I'm gonna unpack this a little because I think there are two different questions here. One is what happened in the past when people things to us and we wouldn't react. Why weren't we reacting? Like, did we not know? Like, we knew it wasn't okay, but why didn't we react? And what does it mean now that we're in a position to react? Does that make it more or less scary? Right? Are those? Is that a fair separation of those?
yeah.
Okay, so let me.
And like growing up back then, like I never called myself American, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we weren't, because everywhere I went, people would say, "What are you?" Right? And now it's so much that it's a joke. Now that we all know we are not supposed to say, "What are you?" So much so that now white people will come up to me like, "I know I'm not supposed to say, 'What are you?' but what are you?" Right? That's the new "What are you?" Anyway, the new "What are you?" is "What are you?" So I think that the thing that is really important to know is that there's a lot of survival strategies that we were employing to not feel the racism when we were growing up. We were also, a lot of us, coming from parents who had immigrated here from a country in which racism was not the thing that they were dealing with. Maybe they were dealing with colorism, maybe they were dealing with classism. Racism was not the thing they were dealing with, so they were wildly unequipped to recognize it as it was happening. They also were, in many cases, buying into the model minority myth and saying, well, at least we're not them being Black Americans. So we're going to put ourselves above them and ignore whatever's happening to us. I think it's really wildly important right now that we all do this work, you and me, and all of us who are South Asian American, specifically Indian American, that come with a different sense of power than many other South Asian communities, that we unpack this really fucking quickly and figure out why we had those survival strategies, what that meant for us, whose life we were benefiting from, like whose work we were putting ourselves above. What did that look like, and why did we employ those strategies, and how do we now undo that damage, both to ourselves and to the communities around us? So when you ask that question, like, why did I take it? You took it because you didn't know better, but you know better now. And what do you do with the know better? To me, what you do with the know better is you look around and see all the other communities that you impacted in that moment, because there's the part where you were scarred, and then there's the scarring we did to other communities. You unpack that and you figure out how to align yourselves with them so we can get over this great loop that white America thrives off of, which is when we will either hold the shame inside for who we are and what we are, or we will place it on someone else to never appropriately place the anger where it should be. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I have more to ask, but I will refrain. Thank you.
Now I'm gonna have to go because it's almost 11 and I have a child that I promised to hang out with this Sunday.
And so with that, I thought I'd share one last comment, which is from Priscilla, who had written, "Thank you so much, Mira, for your wisdom and generosity. Your beautiful heart came through on every page, and it's a joy and privilege to see you in this strange new electronic environment."
Oh, that's so lovely.
What a great way to close. Thanks everyone for your time. Thanks so much for spending this day with Mira and with me. Next weekend on Saturday at noon Eastern Daylight Time, we'll have Harlan Coben with us. The following Saturday, we will have Minjin Lee. And then the following Sunday, we will have 3 writers, Maya Lang, Jessica Pierce-Rotundi, and Stephen Kiernan on a Sunday afternoon edition with the House of Beautiful Business based in Berlin. Thank you all so much. Strength, safety, health to all of you. Look after those in your life and yourself. We'll see you then. Thank you, Mira. Thanks, everybody.
So you heard some Priscilla.
You did, because I had made a comment to her.